2025 has been a big year for brand marketing. The transformation of online search from rankings and clicks to citations and visibility put a new emphasis on brand impact. In the meantime, popular brands like Southwest and Cracker Barrel made the news for taking actions that put their brand in a bit of a negative light. If you're thinking of making changes to your brand, have a listen to this conversation with Adam Morgan, VP of Brand at Twilio, before you touch anything.
All right, I am Adam Morgan, Vice President of Brand at Twilio. But to understand who I am, I'm going to go back to a core belief that I have, which is that emotional ideas are paramount. So I remember back in the early 90s being in college. And yes, I was going to be a chemical engineer. I was all about inventing something. But I found some books in the library that were these advertising annuals, and I started reading them. And I saw all of these big campaigns and ideas, and it just like lit up my brain. And I was like, holy filth, this is what I want to do. And so I switched over, and ever since, like, that's been my career, is the chase to find amazing ideas that impact people, that impact companies, that impact whatever. I started out early in my career, and I worked for about 20 years in advertising agency life, big agencies like McCann Erickson or Publicis, down to boutiques down in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And the theme through all of it is, whether it was like tech or finance or whatever it may be, it was all about the pursuit of finding those big ideas, something that made you feel something.
When is the right time to think about refreshing your brand? We've seen companies switch up their brand because they're struggling, or they feel the brand was tarnished by something, some sort of incident, from a data breach to a PR disaster. But healthy companies do it too. So what is it? Is there a time to say, it's time to look at the brand again?
It's an important balance. And I'll be honest, the way I perceive a brand is a living thing that you're constantly checking in on. You shouldn't it's not a set it and forget it and then, wait for the next, CMO to make a change for it. It's really, the question you should be asking is, are we resonating with our audience? Do they care about us? Are we saying the things that light them up? Are they passionate? Are they fans? If they're not, then you should be changing it, even if you've slightly kind of gone off course. And I'll say, happy to share, with Twilio, we just did a big, huge rebrand. And why did we do it? What are the reasons behind it? And they fit in some of those categories. And I think that, one of them was, if you get a new audience, right? If you expand beyond your current audience, you mean something to one audience, but do you mean the same thing to other audiences? Or maybe you're in a new category, or maybe you're in some other change in the business that warrants you to look again at the brand. So for us at Twilio, a couple things that happened. Number one, we had acquired some other companies, and we were merging them together. And it had taken a couple years, but it was finally the moment where we needed to just kind of figure out what's that singular story across all of these products that ties it together. Number two, and I think this is a symptom, because this is the same thing that happened at Splunk, Cisco, it's just a symptom of B2B brands, especially in tech, is that as you start to grow, maybe you start out and you're really, really tight with one specific audience, like with Twilio as developers. And as you grow, you start to get into a bigger, more buying committee or enterprise sales motion. And then things start to shift. Suddenly you're like, oh, filth, I was all in on the kind of the end person, but now I've got all these C-suite, and I've got this buying committee, I've got all these other things, and you start to expand and get broad. And I think a lot of us, or a lot of brands, lose their way and start to think, we've got to only focus on the C-suite because those are bigger deals. We've got to only focus on this specific audience. And it really creates a problem, because then you're trying to be all things to all different audiences, and there's not a common thread. And sometimes bifurcation and chaos ensues, and the next thing you know, you don't mean anything to anybody. So that was also a thing with Twilio. When I first joined, we were not only bringing multiple brands and sub-brands together, but we had gone through this enterprise transition where we kind of lost a little bit of our swagger with the developers, because we were trying to be all things to all people. So we had to find a way and an emotional connection to all of them that was uniform and still fit with the brand. So I think that's a good reason why. I would say you don't. That's why we call it a rebrand or a brand refresh rather than a new brand, because it truly is about correcting constantly. Now, you don't want to do it all the time. Like if you're changing your brand every year, then you're causing chaos, even with your audience. But as long as you're making meaningful changes that direct you back to that core relationship with your audiences so that they're feeling connected and feeling like you stand for something that they value, then you're on the right path.
All right. I think brand folks like yourself probably get a little sick of hearing people who aren't brand folks think color, logo, things like that, right? But where do you start? You're thinking we're going to do a brand refresh. What's the first thing you go and do? It's not redraw the logo in a different color.
Oh, hell no. And let me start out by saying it's so hard because I think the spotlight for other people who are not branders, that's all they see is the logo or the colors, right? And I have been in those conversations. Let's look at a couple recent things that have happened. Walmart did a quote rebrand, and it was like a slight change to their color blue and a slight change to their logo. I worked at Adobe for 9 years, and after our quote rebrand, it was like a slight change to the logo and a slight change to the color. And then there are other rebrands that are like completely off the rails, and you're like, what was going on with that one? Did they just totally lose sight of their audience? The reality is it's really, really hard and complicated, especially with big companies. And I've been in those meetings where there's not a willingness to make massive changes. And that's why you end up with the slight logo change or the slight color change. But honestly, where I start has nothing to do with that. Those, if you're looking at the list of all the 30 things you need to do in a rebrand, those are like the final two. And they get a lot of limelight, but they're not the real reason of where I would start. Where I would start, and where I did with Twilio, was understanding the why. And it really is about the story. What do you stand for in your customer's mind? If you believe the books of like positioning, where you need to know where you stand and what people think of you, that's where you need to start. Like, what is the singular story, the singular thread that's going to make that deep, meaningful connection, and then everything else falls out of that? For example, when we started with Twilio, what I first did, for even, of course, it was like doing a big audit. Look at all of the creative, all the parts and pieces, the communications, the stories, the elements that we share with customers to see what we're saying now and what we're trying to communicate. And then there was a lot more data. We did customer interviews. I did executive interviews. So we did research, qualitative, quantitative. I looked at every little video that had been done that I can get my hands on that anyone in the company had made since the beginning of the company, years and years and years ago. And it's really to understand all of those moving parts and pieces and then distill it down to, but what are the singular things that not only are true and authentic to who we are as a company, but also what do the customers care about so deeply that they'd be willing to go out and get the tattoo of our logo, right? Like there's that whole in between that you have to figure out. It was, a journey for a good month and a half. And I spent more time on that than the rest of it. It took us, to be honest, it only took us a little more over 3 months to completely figure out the rebrand and do it internally. That's not to say like when it launched externally, but at least to get to the board of directors and get approval. That was the length of time. And there were many factors in that. First, it was landing on what that why is. And then once we had that why, then it was easy of like, okay, when we make other decisions such as, how are we going to go to market? What's our positioning? How do we want to, figure out our messaging hierarchy? Then when we get to logo and artwork and distinctive assets and brand elements that are unique, so that as you look at our communications and our ads and our things, you're like, oh, that's Twilio, right? So those all fell out of it later. And a large part, I have to give a lot of, cred to our upper leadership, because I've done the same thing at different companies. And the fact that we did it in 3 months is pretty remarkable, mostly because our CEO and our CMO 100% trusted me and didn't micromanage and just got out of the way and just said, go for it. Whereas when you think about, like, I can imagine, and I wasn't there for the Walmart one, but I can imagine when you get to those big companies, because I've been there at Adobe and others and Cisco, it's like there's so many layers and people that's what slows all of it down and waters it all down and makes it take a lot longer, years and years with little change.
I have to ask you, is brand marketing making a comeback? We've seen people, especially in B2B, get down on performance marketing in some sectors. Search marketing has kind of been thrown for a loop with AI that's changing incredibly rapidly thanks to the LLMs. Does that all open the door for brand again?
Absolutely. And I'm seeing a resurgence, especially in B2B companies, because you're right. It's like the pendulum, when we started measuring things, just swung so hard into performance marketing. And we measured everything. And it was like, well, of course, let's ignore brand because it's hard to measure. It's difficult to understand what value you're getting from it. But as we've learned more and more about measurement, we've actually found a lot of great measurement tools for brand. It's not just performance marketing that you can understand where the brand is at. We've got, we can measure branded search. We can measure intent. We can see how much more lift there is from big campaigns and awareness efforts. So I think as the luster has lost a little bit on performance marketing, things were swinging back. I'm sensing a lot more, and I'm seeing notes on LinkedIn from CMOs who are understanding this and saying, you're right. Like when you have a great brand, it makes all the other steps easier. I can do a bunch of performance marketing and optimize the hell out of something, but eventually there are diminishing returns because I'm just squeezing more juice out of a little grape. But if I can create a bigger brand presence and establish, a whole bunch of grapes or a whole bunch of offerings and feeling and connection to that company, then there's a lot more performance that I can get out of it. So I'm seeing brand budgets swing back that way. I know our CEO, our CMO is certainly on board with it and understands the value of having that brand presence, especially in B2B. And so we're putting a lot more effort into how do we build up the story of the builder and get it out there so that people can feel it more. And then we can start to, serve up all the performance ads and down funnel elements. So that's the trend I'm seeing, certainly.
All right. Yeah, it's hard to get much out of performance marketing if you're sort of starting at zero with familiarity. When you see an offer and the brand is already resonating to some extent, you're a step ahead. If you're starting at zero, it's like, who are these people? Why am I seeing this offer? Right.
100%.
All right. Adam Morgan, VP of Brand at Twilio. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks for having me.